This happened 2 summers ago when a group of us rented a cabin in Tennessee for a long weekend. There were 6 of us total, 3 couples, everybody in their late 20s. The trip wasn't planned around anything special. Nobody was getting married. Nobody had a birthday. We were all just burned out from work and wanted a few days away from apartments, traffic, and staring at screens. At least that was the idea. The cabin looked great online. Huge wraparound porch, hot tub, fire pit, view of the mountains. The listing kept using the phrase, private mountain getaway, which I probably read 20 times before booking. If you've ever rented a vacation cabin with friends, you know how these trips usually go. The drive out there took most of the day. By the time we arrived, everybody was tired and hungry. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road with woods on both sides. There were other rentals scattered throughout the area, though you couldn't really see them. The trees blocked most of the view. I remember being relieved when we finally pulled into the driveway. The place actually looked like the pictures. That's surprisingly rare. Usually vacation rentals photograph one corner of the property from the perfect angle and hope nobody notices. This one was genuinely nice. Large living room, stone fireplace, open kitchen, 2 floors, the kind of place designed specifically for groups. Everybody immediately started claiming bedrooms. Coolers got unloaded, food got unpacked, music went on, the normal vacation stuff. The first evening was completely uneventful. We grilled burgers, sat around the fire pit, talked about work, talked about people we hadn't seen in years. At some point I remember thinking how quiet it was. Just rural quiet. No traffic, no sirens. Eventually everybody went to bed. The second day followed the exact same pattern. Sleep in, coffee, hike, come back, food, hot tub, more food. Vacation. The thing that started everything was a conversation about the upstairs. Specifically, a part of the upstairs none of us had seen. The cabin had 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. At least that's what we thought. One afternoon, my friend Ryan came downstairs and asked who was using the 3rd bedroom. Everybody looked confused. There wasn't a 3rd bedroom. Ryan insisted there was. He said he'd seen another door at the end of the hallway. My girlfriend immediately said she hadn't noticed one. Neither had I. Ryan kept arguing. Eventually, all 6 of us went upstairs together. The hallway wasn't very long. 3 doors. Bathroom, bedroom, bedroom. That was it. No 3rd room. Ryan looked genuinely embarrassed. Started laughing. Said maybe he'd seen it when he was half asleep. Everybody made fun of him for the rest of the day. Vacation friendships basically operate on finding one stupid thing and refusing to let it go. For the next few hours, every conversation somehow came back to Ryan's imaginary bedroom. By dinner, the joke had gotten old. Nobody was talking about it anymore. Then that night, something small happened. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing water. The kitchen was downstairs. I remember walking through the dark living room, trying not to step on anything. The cabin creaked constantly. Old wood, temperature changes. Nothing unusual. While filling a glass at the sink, I heard footsteps overhead. I didn't think much of it. Somebody else was awake. Big deal. 6 people in one cabin. People get up during the night. The thing I remember is that the footsteps sounded directly above the kitchen. That part stuck with me because there wasn't a room above the kitchen. At least not one we'd seen. I stood there for a second listening. The sound stopped. A few seconds later it started again. Slow, steady, back and forth. Then silence. I went back to bed. The next morning I completely forgot about it. Until breakfast. Ryan mentioned hearing somebody walking around upstairs during the night. Everybody started blaming each other. Nobody admitted it. Again, no big deal. People walk around. People wake up. Normal explanation. The conversation moved on. Then later that afternoon, my girlfriend brought up something weird. She asked if anyone else had heard voices through the ceiling. The room got quiet for a second. Not because anybody was scared, because it sounded random. She explained she'd been sitting alone in the living room that morning while everybody else was outside. For maybe 30 seconds, she thought she heard a man and a woman talking above her. Too muffled to understand. Just conversation. Then it stopped. Nobody knew what to do with that information. Ryan immediately started making jokes about his invisible 3rd bedroom. Everybody laughed. The moment passed, but I noticed something. Nobody actually had an explanation. The cabin wasn't connected to another building, at least not visibly, and the ceiling she heard the voices through sat below an area we'd already walked through. There wasn't supposed to be another room there. That evening, we started paying attention. Not intentionally at first. Once somebody points out something odd, your brain starts looking for it. A few times we'd hear movement overhead, a floorboard creak, a dull thump, the kind of sounds you'd normally ignore. Now everybody noticed. The weirdest part was how inconsistent it felt. Hours would pass with nothing. Then you'd hear something and immediately wonder where it came from. Nobody seemed worried, mostly curious. The mystery became part of the trip, like a game. Ryan had fully committed to the joke by this point. He started referring to the upstairs neighbors. Every strange noise got blamed on them. Glass falls over, upstairs neighbors. Someone loses their phone charger, upstairs neighbors. Missing bag of chips, definitely upstairs neighbors. The joke lasted until late Saturday night. That's when I stepped outside onto the side porch to take a phone call. The signal inside the cabin was terrible. I remember pacing near the railing while talking to my brother. It was already dark. The woods were completely black beyond the porch lights. The call only lasted a few minutes. As I was heading back inside, I happened to glance upward. And that's when I noticed something I swear none of us had paid attention to before. There was a window above us, a lit window. And based on where it was positioned, it wasn't connected to any room we'd been inside. I stood there staring at the window for a few seconds longer than I probably should have. Partly because it caught me off guard, partly because I was trying to figure out how I'd missed it before. The cabin wasn't enormous. We'd spent 2 full days there already. People had wandered through every room multiple times, taken pictures, posted videos, done tours for friends back home. Yet somehow I couldn't remember seeing that window. I walked back inside and immediately found Ryan. He was sitting at the kitchen island eating tortilla chips straight from the bag. I asked him to come outside. The second he looked up, his expression changed. Not dramatically, more like somebody solving a puzzle. He pointed at the window and said, "That's where my imaginary bedroom is." I remember laughing, then immediately stopping because I realized neither of us was joking anymore. A few minutes later, everybody else came outside. Same reaction, confusion. The light stayed on the entire time. You could clearly see it through the trees. The problem was simple. We couldn't figure out where that room actually existed. The window sat above part of the cabin that didn't seem large enough to contain another space. Eventually, somebody suggested we were overthinking it, which was probably true. Vacation boredom can make people fixate on ridiculous things. So we went back inside. The conversation died down, for a while. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everybody else. I always do on trips. Doesn't matter how late I stay up. My body decides 6:30 is the perfect time to be conscious. The cabin was quiet. Coffee sounded like a good idea. While waiting for the machine to finish, I looked outside. The driveway was visible from the kitchen window. So was most of the side of the cabin. That's when I noticed a second staircase, not inside, outside. It ran up the back corner of the building. Wooden stairs, same color as the cabin, partially hidden behind trees. I actually laughed. Mystery solved. The hidden room probably had its own entrance, some weird storage area, maintenance room, something boring. I felt stupid for even caring. Then I walked outside. The stairs led to a door. The door had a number on it, Unit B. I remember stopping halfway up, just staring, because nowhere in the listing had there been any mention of Unit B. Not once. The place had been advertised as an entire cabin, private, secluded, whole property. Those exact phrases. I walked back inside and grabbed my phone. The listing was still active. I checked every picture, every description. Nothing. No mention of another unit. No mention of another entrance. Nothing. At that point, I figured there was an innocent explanation. Maybe storage, maybe maintenance access, maybe the owner lived up there occasionally. Still weird. Still worth asking about. The owner hadn't replied to messages quickly all weekend, so I wasn't expecting an immediate response. I sent one anyway. Simple question, what's Unit B? Then I put my phone away. About an hour later, everybody was awake. I told them. The reaction was immediate. Not fear, validation, especially for Ryan. The man acted like he'd just solved a murder case. For the next hour, we stood around drinking coffee and making theories. The mood stayed light. Then somebody noticed a vehicle, a gray SUV. parked farther down the gravel road. None of us had seen it before. That by itself meant nothing. There were other cabins in the area, other renters, other roads. Still, after discovering Unit B, everybody started paying attention to details they would have ignored earlier. Around noon, I finally got a response from the owner. One sentence. Unit B is a private space and not accessible to guests. That was it. The message annoyed me more than it should have. Not because of the room, because it felt dismissive. If you're renting a place and discover part of the building wasn't disclosed, you're naturally going to ask questions. The owner's response made it sound like I was bothering him. Ryan wanted to knock on the door. Nobody let him. Mostly because we didn't want to be those people. The vacation was almost over anyway. One more night, then everybody would go home. Problem solved. At least that's what I thought. That evening we cooked dinner and sat around the living room playing cards, normal stuff. The hidden apartment became less interesting as the night went on. People started talking about work again, vacation ending, the drive home, reality returning. Around 10 o'clock, my girlfriend got up to grab another drink. A minute later, she came back, looked at me, then quietly asked, "Did one of you guys just go outside?" Everybody said no. She pointed toward the kitchen window. Apparently, she'd seen somebody walking near the side of the cabin, just briefly. A person, dark clothing, gone before she got a good look. The room got quiet. Nobody seemed frightened, more uncomfortable. Because suddenly the abstract idea of another apartment became real. There was probably somebody staying there, someone we'd spent the entire weekend sharing a building with, someone we'd never met. The thing that bothered me wasn't their presence. It was the realization. How many conversations had they heard? How many late-night arguments? How many personal stories? How much of our weekend had actually been private? I started noticing things after that. The wall shared with Unit B sat behind the living room fireplace. Once you knew that, certain sounds made more sense. A muffled thud, a floorboard, movement, nothing dramatic, just enough. The final weird moment happened the next morning. Checkout day. Everybody loading cars, taking trash out, doing the usual cleanup. I happened to be carrying a cooler toward the driveway when I looked up. The curtain in the upstairs window moved. Just slightly. I saw somebody standing there. A woman. Middle-aged, maybe. She stepped back almost immediately. The whole thing lasted 2 seconds, maybe less. I told Ryan afterward. He asked if she waved. I said no. Then he asked if I waved. I hadn't. Neither of us really knew why. Maybe because by then the situation felt awkward, like realizing you've accidentally overheard your neighbors for an entire weekend. The drive home took about 8 hours. The cabin became the main topic of conversation. Everybody had opinions. Some thought the owner should have disclosed the apartment. Others didn't care. A few thought we were making too much of it. Honestly, they might have been right. I've stayed in plenty of rentals since then. A lot of them have attached owner units, caretaker apartments, storage areas. It's more common than people think. What still bothers me is how long it took us to notice. 3 days, 6 adults. Not one person realized another living space existed in the same building. And during those 3 days, we'd treated the cabin exactly how people treat a private vacation rental. Loud conversations, relationship arguments, personal stories, all the little things you say when you think nobody else is around. I don't think anything sinister happened. I don't think the people upstairs were spying on us. Truthfully, they were probably trying to avoid us as much as we were unknowingly avoiding them. Still, whenever I rent a cabin now, I spend way too much time looking at floor plans, checking windows, looking for extra doors. Because once you've spent a weekend convinced you're alone and later realize you weren't, you start noticing details you never paid attention to before. I think one of the most awkward parts about dating somebody seriously is reaching the point where you start meeting extended family. Parents are one thing, grandparents are another. But when you get invited to some family place that has existed for decades before you showed up, it feels different. You suddenly become very aware that you're the outsider. That was me when my boyfriend invited me to his family's cabin. This was about 6 years ago. We'd been dating for a little over a year, long enough that I knew his parents well, long enough that family holidays weren't weird anymore. The cabin trip felt like the next step. His family had owned the place forever. At least that's how everyone talked about it. Nobody ever said when they bought it. Nobody ever said who built it. The cabin simply existed, like it had always been there. It sat on a lake in northern Wisconsin, about 4 hours from where we lived. His parents went every summer. His grandparents practically lived there. His aunts and uncles rotated through constantly. Everybody seemed to have stories involving the place. The first thing I noticed when we arrived wasn't the lake. It wasn't the cabin. It was the photographs. They were everywhere, not in a creepy way, just family cabin way. Every hallway, every shelf, every wall, framed fishing pictures, family reunions, old boats, kids holding giant fish, Christmas gatherings, graduations. The cabin felt less like a vacation property and more like a giant scrapbook. I remember liking that. My family wasn't sentimental at all. My parents barely printed photographs. Seeing decades of family history displayed everywhere felt kind of nice. That first weekend was completely normal. Swimming, board games, cooking, listening to people tell the same stories they'd apparently been telling for 20 years. The thing about large families is they eventually develop official stories. Everybody already knows the ending. Everybody still laughs anyway. As the outsider, I mostly listened and looked at photographs. A lot of photographs. Partly because there were so many. Partly because I didn't know most of the people in them. One picture kept catching my attention. It hung near the staircase. The photo looked old, maybe late 80s. A group standing on the dock. My boyfriend's grandparents looked much younger. His mom couldn't have been older than 15. There were probably 10 people in the picture. One guy stood near the middle. Dark hair, broad shoulders, big smile. For some reason I assumed he was one of the uncles. Later that evening, I pointed at the photo and asked which uncle it was. The response felt strange. Not dramatic, just strange. His mom looked at the picture, then said, "That's not your uncle." I asked who it was. She hesitated, just for a second, then said, "An old family friend." That was it. That was it. The conversation immediately moved somewhere else. At the time, I didn't think anything about it. Families have old friends, not exactly breaking news. The next morning, I noticed him again. Different picture, different year. Same guy, standing beside my boyfriend's grandfather. Then another, and another. By lunchtime, I'd seen him in at least 6 photographs. He wasn't lingering in the background. He was clearly part of the family. Birthday parties, fishing trips, cookouts. One photo even showed him helping carry a Christmas tree. The more pictures I found, the less family friend made sense. This guy had been around constantly. I finally mentioned it to my boyfriend. We were sitting on the dock, nothing serious, just casual conversation. I pointed out how often the same man appeared. My boyfriend surprised me by shrugging. He didn't know much about him either. Said he'd always assumed it was some relative. That answer somehow made the situation stranger, because if he didn't know, who did? That evening, rain moved in. Everybody ended up inside. His grandparents had gone to bed early. Most of the family gathered around the living room playing cards. I was helping clean up after dinner when his aunt asked me to grab extra candles from a storage closet. The closet sat off a narrow hallway near the back of the cabin. Inside were shelves packed with random things. Games, blankets, old fishing gear, boxes. While looking for candles, I found several photo albums stacked together. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened one, then another. Within 5 minutes, I'd forgotten about the candles completely. The albums went back decades. The same families, the same cabin, the same lake, and over again, the same man. Sometimes he appeared in nearly every picture. He wasn't standing on the edges. He wasn't some occasional visitor. He looked completely integrated into the family. I remember one photograph especially. Everybody was gathered around a picnic table. My boyfriend's grandfather sat at the center. The man sat directly beside him, arm around his shoulder, the kind of body language people usually reserve for family. Then I noticed something else. A photograph a few pages later looked damaged, not torn, modified. Part of the image had been carefully cut away. At first I assumed it was accidental. Then I found another and another. Always the same thing. A section removed, a person missing. The cuts weren't random. Whoever did them had been deliberate. I started comparing pictures. My stomach dropped a little. The removed sections always seemed to involve the same man. Not every time, but enough times. Suddenly, I wasn't looking at old photographs anymore. I was looking at evidence somebody had been erased. The thought felt ridiculous. I knew that. Families don't erase people. Real life isn't a mystery novel. Still, once the idea entered my head, I couldn't stop seeing it. I put the albums away and grabbed the candles. The entire walk back, I kept thinking about those photographs. Later that night, I found myself sitting on the porch with my boyfriend's grandmother. Just the two of us. Everybody else had gone inside. The rain had stopped. The lake was completely still. She'd always been nice to me. Easy to talk to. Probably the person I felt most comfortable around. Without really planning to, I brought him up. The man in the pictures. I asked who he was. The change in her expression happened instantly. Not fear. Not anger. Something sad. Something tired. She stared across the lake for several seconds before answering. Then she quietly said, "You don't need to worry about him." I waited for the rest. There wasn't any. A few moments later, she stood up, said goodnight, and went inside, leaving me alone on the porch, wondering why a simple question suddenly felt like I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. The weird thing wasn't what she said. It was how final it sounded. Like the conversation had already happened years ago and I was arriving late. I remember sitting on the porch for another 10 minutes after she went inside. The lake was completely dark by then. One of those quiet northern lakes where you can't see the opposite shore at night. I kept thinking about the photographs, not because I thought something horrible had happened. Honestly, my curiosity had become bigger than the mystery itself. Everybody seemed to know something. Nobody seemed interested in talking about it. The next morning, life returned to normal. Breakfast, coffee, people moving around the cabin. The strange conversation from the night before felt almost silly in daylight. I told myself to let it go. Families have private history. That's normal. The problem was that once you notice something, you keep noticing it. The photographs suddenly stood out everywhere. I couldn't walk through the cabin without seeing that guy's face. Over the fireplace, on shelves, in albums, near the staircase. He seemed woven into decades of family memories. Then, at some point, he wasn't. That afternoon, a few of us took the boat out. His grandfather came along. I ended up sitting beside him during most of the ride. We got along pretty well. He was one of those older guys who didn't talk much, but always seemed comfortable with silence. At one point, we drifted near the center of the lake while everybody else fished. Without thinking, I mentioned the photographs. Immediately, I regretted it. Not because of his reaction, because it felt nosy. He looked toward the shoreline for a few seconds, then nodded slightly, like he already knew exactly who I meant. I expected some explanation. Instead, he just said, "He spent a lot of time here." That was all. I laughed awkwardly and asked if he was family. His answer surprised me. No. Then he went back to watching the water. Conversation over. That should have frustrated me. Instead, it somehow made the mystery feel more real. Nobody was refusing to answer. Nobody was acting dramatic. They simply weren't interested in discussing it, like talking about an old injury. Not secret, just unnecessary. The rest of the weekend passed normally. Nothing creepy happened. Nobody whispered about the guy. Nobody told me half-finished stories. Honestly, if this were a movie, it would have been disappointing. Real life usually is. The mystery mostly existed in small moments, expressions, silences, people changing the subject. Years passed after that trip. My boyfriend and I stayed together. I visited the cabin many more times. The strange thing is that I gradually stopped wondering about the photographs. Not because I got answers, because life got busy. Jobs, apartments, bills, the normal stuff. Every once in a while, I'd notice the same face in an old picture, then move on. It became part of the cabin itself, like an old stain in the ceiling, something everybody saw but nobody mentioned. Then one summer, maybe 4 years after my first visit, something happened that brought it all back. His grandparents had finally decided to downsize. Nothing dramatic, they were simply getting older. The family spent several weekends sorting through decades of belongings. Everybody got assigned different tasks. Mine involved organizing boxes in a storage room. Hours of dusty paperwork, old receipts, instruction manuals, random things nobody wanted. Near the bottom of one box, I found a stack of loose photographs. Most weren't interesting. Then I found one I'd never seen before. The man was standing on the dock, by himself. The picture looked older than most, maybe late 70s. What caught my attention wasn't him, it was what somebody had written on the back. Just a first name, nothing else. No explanation, no last name, no date, just a name. For a moment I considered showing it to someone. Then I stopped. I honestly don't know why. Maybe because I suddenly realized I didn't actually want the answer anymore. The mystery had existed for years. Whatever happened belonged to people who lived it. Not me. I put the photograph back into the box. The family eventually sold the cabin a few years later. That part was harder than I expected, even for me. Places like that become containers for memories. Everybody knows they're temporary. You still hate seeing them go. The last time I visited, most of the photographs had already been taken down. The walls looked strangely empty. Before leaving, I walked through the cabin one final time. Living room, hallway, kitchen, bedrooms. All the places where those pictures had hung. The cabin felt smaller without them, less alive somehow. As I was leaving, I noticed one frame still sitting on a shelf waiting to be packed. A group photo. The same man standing among everybody else, smiling, looking completely comfortable, exactly where he belonged. I remember staring at it for a second, then putting it into a cardboard box with the others. To this day, I still don't know who he was. I've heard theories, an old friend, a former business partner, someone who practically became family. Maybe all of those are true, maybe none are. What sticks with me isn't the mystery itself, it's the reaction people had whenever I asked. Not fear, not guilt, not secrecy. Just sadness, a quiet kind of sadness, the sort people carry for a very long time. Whatever happened, it seemed less like somebody had been erased and more like somebody had once mattered a great deal. And somewhere along the way, the family decided that remembering him was easier than explaining him. Maybe that's why the photograph stayed on the walls all those years, just as a reminder that some people remain part of a place long after their story stops being told. And honestly, I think that's more believable than any answer I could have been given. I don't usually tell people I grew up around cabins, not because it's mysterious or anything, it's just not the kind of detail that ever mattered in my life. But I guess it explains why I never thought much of the place where this happened. It wasn't some family vacation home, it was a work cabin. My dad and two other guys from his construction crew bought it together in the early 2000s. Cheap land up north, mostly woods. A small structure already sitting on it that they fixed up, which, really just meant adding insulation and replacing whatever was falling apart that week. They used it as a weekend base when they had jobs in the area. Sometimes it was hunting season, sometimes fishing, sometimes just drinking beer and getting away from their actual lives for a couple days. I started going there when I was maybe 16. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't have anything else to do. At first, it was exactly what you'd expect. Boring, a little dirty, always smelling like old wood, oil, and whatever food someone forgot in the fridge. There were no real rules. If you were there, you helped out. If you weren't, nobody cared. That was the whole setup. The cabin itself was 2 small rooms and a loft, kitchen area in one corner, wood stove in the other, no internet, barely any signal, the kind of place where time feels slower just because there's nothing to measure it with. The weird thing didn't start as anything obvious. It started with sound. We were there late October, hunting season. Cold enough that the ground stayed frozen in the morning but melted slightly during the day. There were 5 of us that weekend. My dad, 2 co-workers of his, me, and one guy I didn't know very well named Mark. Mark was new to the crew, quiet, the type of person who never really joined conversations but always seemed to be listening anyway. The first night we got there, everything was normal. We cooked, watched a game on a tiny portable TV that barely worked, drank, went to bed early because we had planned to get up before sunrise. I remember waking up around 3 a.m., not because of anything dramatic, just that kind of half-awake state where your body decides it's done sleeping. The cabin was completely dark except for the faint glow of the wood stove dying down. Everyone else was asleep, at least I assumed they were. Then I heard footsteps, not inside the room I was in, above me, which didn't make sense because there wasn't a full second floor, just a partial loft above the storage area. Nobody slept up there, not that I knew of. The footsteps were slow, measured, like someone pacing, not random movement, back and forth, then stopping, then starting again. I remember lying there trying to convince myself it was just the cabin settling. Old wood, cold air, animals outside, all the usual explanations people give themselves when they don't want to get up and check. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded deliberate. After a few minutes, I finally sat up. I listened. The footsteps stopped, completely. That made it worse, because now it felt like whatever it was had noticed me noticing it. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I convinced myself it was one of the guys. Probably Mark. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was pacing. So I got up and went to the kitchen area. Nobody was there. All 4 bunks were occupied, sleeping bags zipped, no movement. That should have been the end of it. I went back to bed, told myself I'd imagined it. The next morning I didn't mention it. Nobody seemed tired. Nobody mentioned being up. We went hunting like normal. The woods were quiet in that way they always are when it's too early and too cold for anything to move. By midday, I had completely forgotten about the night, or at least I thought I had. It came back that evening. We were sitting inside after dinner, talking, cleaning gear, normal stuff. Mark suddenly asked, kind of casually, if anyone else had heard someone walking around last night. Nobody answered immediately. My dad looked at him like he was joking. One of the other guys laughed and said it was probably deer outside. But Mark didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, like that wasn't the answer he was expecting. Then he said something I still remember clearly. It sounded like it was right above me. Nobody responded to that either. Not because it was scary, because it didn't fit into the conversation. My dad just changed the subject. That was usually how things went. If something didn't make sense, you didn't turn it into a big deal. You moved on. The second night was colder, wind hitting the side of the cabin harder than before. I slept worse, kept waking up. Each time I did, I'd listen for the footsteps, and each time I wasn't sure if I was actually hearing anything or just expecting to. Around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom outside. The cabin didn't have indoor plumbing for everything. There was a small shed maybe 30 yards away. Walking out there in the dark felt normal enough. But on the way back, I noticed something. Light coming through the loft window. Very faint, not like a flashlight directly pointed out, more like someone inside moving around with a light source. I stopped for a second, looked up. The window was small and half covered from the inside. The light disappeared almost immediately. I told myself it was Mark again, or one of the others, but when I got back inside, all 4 guys were in their bunks, sleeping. That was the first time I felt something shift. Not fear exactly, just confusion I couldn't explain away cleanly anymore. The next morning, I asked my dad casually if anyone ever stayed up in the loft. He gave me a weird look, said no, then added that the loft wasn't really safe to sleep in anyway. The boards weren't finished properly. It was mostly storage. That should have ended it. But it didn't, because later that day, while we were packing gear, I noticed something I hadn't before. The ladder leading up to the loft wasn't dusty, not like the rest of the cabin, like it had been used recently. Not once, repeatedly. And that's when I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before, because suddenly I wasn't sure what I had been hearing at all. I didn't bring it up again that day, partly because nobody else seemed interested, partly because I wasn't even sure how to explain what I meant without sounding like I was trying to turn nothing into something. Cabins like that have a way of messing with your sense of timing. You sleep badly, you wake up at odd hours, you hear things you don't fully register, and then the next day, everything feels normal again under daylight. So I kept quiet. We went out hunting again that morning. Same routine, same quiet woods, same freezing air that makes everything feel sharper than it should. Mark was quieter than usual. I noticed that more than anything else. Not nervous, just distracted, like he was thinking about something else while everyone else was talking. Around midday, one of the other guys joked about how Mark must have been sleepwalking the night before. It wasn't said seriously, just typical cabin humor. Mark didn't laugh. He just shrugged and said he didn't sleep much. That was it. No explanation, no detail, which, in hindsight, stood out more than anything else he said that weekend. That afternoon, I stayed back at the cabin alone while the others went a bit deeper into the woods. My dad asked me to organize some gear in the storage corner. It was one of those tasks nobody really cares about, but always ends up assigned to whoever's around. While moving boxes, I ended up near the base of the loft again. Up close, the ladder didn't just look used, it looked recently handled. The wood was slightly worn on the sides where hands would grip it. Not heavily, but enough to notice once you were paying attention. I stood there for a while, just looking up into the dark space above. It didn't feel threatening. It felt unfinished, like something about the place hadn't been properly resolved. Eventually, I climbed halfway up. Not all the way, just enough to see over the edge. The loft wasn't large, maybe the size of a small bedroom, as my dad said. Old boxes, tools, a couple of folded tarps, and something that made me stop moving completely. A sleeping bag, not rolled up, not stored, laid out flat against the far wall. That shouldn't have meant anything on its own, but it did, because it didn't look forgotten. It looked placed, carefully, like someone expected to come back to it. I didn't touch anything, just climbed back down and stood there for a while, trying to decide what I was actually looking at. The rational part of my brain kept pushing the same explanation. One of the guys must have used it. Maybe years ago, maybe forgot it was there. Maybe nobody cleaned it out properly. That kind of thing happens in places like that. Things get left behind, things get ignored. I wanted to believe that. But that didn't explain the footsteps, or the light in the window, or Mark asking the question the night before, like he wasn't fully expecting the answer he got. That evening, the tension shifted slightly. Not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet adjustment in the atmosphere. People were still joking, still talking, still acting normal. But conversations ended quicker. Laughter didn't last as long. Even my dad seemed more observant than usual. At one point, while we were sitting around the table, Mark stood up and went outside without saying anything. No explanation, no comment, just walked out into the dark. A few seconds passed. Then my dad followed him. I stayed inside. I remember sitting there listening to the door close and thinking that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be talked about directly. A few minutes later, they both came back in. Nothing was said, not immediately. We just kept doing what we were doing. Cleaning, packing, avoiding eye contact in a way nobody would admit to. That night I didn't sleep, not because I was scared, because I was waiting. Every sound felt more intentional than before. The cabin settling, the wind, even the distant movement outside. Around 1 a.m., I heard something again. Not footsteps this time. A different sound, like something shifting in the loft. Slow, controlled, not random. I stayed still, listened carefully. The sound lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. No follow-up, no continuation, just silence again. I waited for someone else to react. Nobody did, which meant either I was the only one awake, or nobody else was willing to acknowledge it. The next morning felt different in a way I can't really explain. Nobody talked much at breakfast. Mark was already outside when I woke up. My dad avoided the loft area completely when we were loading gear. Not obviously, just didn't go near it. At one point, I finally asked him directly if anyone had ever slept up there. He paused longer than I expected, long enough that it didn't feel like memory searching. It felt like decision-making. Then he said no. Again. Same answer as before. But this time it came with something else. A look. Not warning, not fear. More like acknowledgement, like he understood why I was asking and didn't want to go further. We packed up shortly after that. No one mentioned the loft again. No one mentioned the footsteps. No one mentioned the sleeping bag. But as we were leaving, I looked back at the cabin one last time, and for a brief second I noticed something I hadn't before. The loft window wasn't just dark, it looked slightly open. Just enough to suggest air moving through it, like something inside was no longer still. I only worked at the lake marina for one summer, but it's one of those jobs that still feels weirdly clear in my memory. Not because anything dramatic happened every day. Most days were actually boring. Cleaning boats, checking fuel, dealing with people who acted like they owned the entire lake because they rented a pontoon for 6 hours. But there was this one thing that never really made sense to me, and it started small enough that I almost didn't notice it. The marina had a sign-in sheet for overnight boat slips. Pretty standard stuff. If you came in late or stayed overnight, you wrote your name, boat number, and estimated return time. Nothing complicated. We kept it in a plastic folder at the front desk. And for the first few weeks, everything looked normal. Names I recognized. Local families, weekend fishermen, tourists from out of state. Then I started noticing entries that didn't match anyone I ever actually saw. At first, I thought I was just missing people. The lake was busy. People come and go. You don't always see every boat that passes through, but the same names kept appearing, week after week, and not just names. Same handwriting, same pattern, always arriving late at night, always leaving early in the morning, never during normal marina hours. I remember asking one of the older guys who worked there if he knew anything about them. He barely looked up and said something like, "Oh, those are just the night slips." Like that explained everything. It didn't, because there weren't official night slips, at least not anything I'd been told about. But I didn't push it. When you're the new guy at a seasonal job, you learn pretty quickly when not to ask too many questions. A couple weeks later, I was closing up the office alone. It was maybe around 11 p.m. The dock lights were on, reflecting off the water in that flickering way they do when there's a breeze. Most of the boats were gone, just a few still tied up farther out. I was going through the sign-in sheet when I noticed something odd, a fresh entry. I hadn't seen anyone come in, no engines, no lights, but the paper had a new name written on it. The handwriting was different from the usual ones. Messier, rushed, like whoever wrote it wasn't standing still. It said, Boat 14, returning at sunrise. I looked out toward the docks. Everything looked normal, rest-fresh. Then I noticed Boat 14 was already tied up, which didn't make sense because I hadn't checked anyone in under that number. I walked outside just to confirm. The boat was there, quiet, no movement, lights off, rope tied neatly, like it had been there for hours. I checked the list again. There was no entry for Boat 14 before that new line. I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe I missed someone checking in earlier. Maybe someone wrote it after the fact. That kind of thing happens when you're busy. Paperwork gets messy. People forget. But what stuck with me was the timing, because I was pretty sure nobody had come in during that hour. The next day, I asked again about the night slips. This time, a different coworker answered. He just laughed a little and said, "Don't worry about those. They're probably just locals messing around." That should have been the end of it. But over the next week, the same thing kept happening. New entries appearing when nobody was around. Boats showing up without me seeing them arrive. Names I couldn't match to any face. And always the same pattern. Late in, early out. Never overlap with normal traffic. One night I decided to stay late just to see what would happen. I told my boss I was finishing inventory and stayed behind after closing. Around midnight I sat in the office lights off, just watching the docks through the window. It was quiet enough that I could hear the water hitting the pylons. For a while, nothing happened. Then I saw movement. A boat approaching slowly without headlights. No navigation lights either. Just a dark shape sliding across the water. That alone felt strange. But what really caught my attention was how it came in. It didn't slow down the way most boats do when approaching a dock. It already seemed to know exactly where it was going. It turned perfectly into slip 14. Nose in. Straight line. No hesitation. I stood up as quietly as I could and moved closer to the window. The boat tied itself off almost immediately. 2 people got off. Or at least I think it was 2. It was hard to tell in the dark. They didn't use flashlights, didn't speak, just moved like they'd done it 100 times before. One of them walked straight toward the marina office. I ducked back behind the counter instinctively. I don't know why. I wasn't scared exactly, just aware that I shouldn't be seen. A few seconds later, I heard the door handle outside shift, then stop. No knock, no entry, just a pause, and then footsteps walking away again. I stayed there until I was sure they were gone. When I finally looked back outside, the boat was still there, completely empty now, tied up like nothing had happened. The next morning, there was a new entry on the sign-in sheet, same handwriting as before. Slip 14, departed 5:42 a.m., no name, no signature, just the time. I asked my coworker about it. He told me I was probably just tired, that I'd mixed things up, but I hadn't written anything down wrong. I knew that much. That was the first time I actually started paying attention to the sheet every hour instead of just checking it at the end of the day. And that's when I noticed something else. Some of the names weren't new, they were repeating. Same boats, same slips, same handwriting, week after week. Like the same people were coming back, but I couldn't remember ever seeing them leave in the first place. And the more I looked at it, the more I started to realize something that didn't make sense. There were boats I recognized as regulars on paper, but I had no memory of ever seeing the people who supposedly owned them. After I noticed the repeats, I started doing something I probably shouldn't have. I began checking the slips more often than I needed to, not because I thought something was going to happen in a dramatic way, more because I couldn't unsee the pattern once it clicked. Same boats, same names, same timing. Like the lake had its own group of people I somehow kept missing. The strange part was how normal everything still looked during the day. Families renting pontoons, kids jumping off docks, fishermen complaining about the weather no matter what it was doing. Nothing about the actual lake felt off. It was only the paperwork that didn't match reality. One afternoon, I asked my supervisor if I could take a look at older sign-in sheets. He didn't hesitate, just pulled out a box from under the counter and slid it over like it wasn't important. "That stuff's all the same," he said, which should have reassured me. It didn't. I started flipping through them while the marina stayed busy outside. At first it looked consistent, normal seasonal traffic. Then I noticed something I wasn't expecting. The same pattern wasn't new. It had been happening for years. Different handwriting over time, but the same structure kept repeating. Late arrivals, early departures, slip 14 showing up constantly, and always without a clear name attached, just numbers, or initials that didn't match any customer records I could find. I asked again about slip 14 specifically. This time my supervisor paused longer than usual, not a casual pause, thinking about what to say pause. Then he finally said, "That one's not supposed to be used during the day." That was it. No explanation after that. Just went back to what he was doing like the conversation had ended properly. But it hadn't, because now I had a place to focus on. That night I stayed again, same setup as before. Office lights off, window slightly cracked so I could hear the dock. Around 11:30 p.m. I saw the first boat approach. Same behavior as before. No lights. Straight path, no hesitation. Slip 14. This time I didn't move. I just watched. Two figures again, maybe the same ones, maybe not. Hard to tell from that distance. They tied up quickly and stepped off, but this time something was different. One of them stopped halfway up the dock, not facing the office, not facing the water, just standing still, like they were listening. For a moment I thought they had noticed me, but then the other one called out quietly. Not loud enough to hear words, just enough to break the silence. And they both continued walking. What stuck with me wasn't their movement. It was how familiar it looked, like they didn't need light, like they didn't need signs, like they had done this exact routine too many times to think about it anymore. A few minutes later, I heard the same pause at the office door. The handle shifted slightly, then stopped. Same as before. But this time I didn't look away. I stayed watching through the window. And that's when I realized something else. There were lights further down the dock, not from the arriving boat, from others. Soft, dim glows inside cabins of boats I had assumed were empty. I hadn't seen anyone come in. No engines, no arrivals. But now, for the first time, I could see movement on multiple boats tied along the water. People stepping out, quiet, unhurried, like they were simply continuing something that had already started long before I got there. I checked the sign-in sheet immediately. New entries were appearing. Not all at once, one by one, different handwriting again, but all following the same structure. Slip numbers, no names, return times listed for early morning. It didn't make sense, not in any normal way, because I hadn't seen a single arrival that night except the first boat, and yet the sheet now looked like the dock was full. I stepped outside. The air felt colder than it should have. Not weather cold, just stillness cold. The dock stretched out in front of me, lined with boats I hadn't seen arrive, and for the first time I noticed something I'd missed every other night. Every slip number on the sheet matched a boat that was physically there now. even the ones I was sure had been empty earlier. I stood there for a long time just trying to reconcile it, trying to figure out what I had missed, or when I had started missing it. And then I saw slip 14 again. Empty. Ropes still tied, but no boat, no people. Just the sign-in sheet inside the office continuing to update itself quietly in the dark. I still don't really know if what happened at that cabin was intentional or just some kind of long-running habit nobody questioned. Either way, I've never seen anything like it since. This was a rented cabin trip up in northern Maine. 4 of us, me, my girlfriend at the time, and 2 of her friends from college. We picked it mostly because it looked simple and private. No neighbors visible in the listing photos. Just woods and water, the kind of place you book when you want to disappear for a few days and not deal with anyone. When we got there, everything was exactly like the photos. Maybe even better. The cabin wasn't fancy. Wood exterior, small dock, 1 main room with a kitchen area and a couple of bedrooms off the side. It had that older cabin smell too. Not bad, just aged wood and lake air mixed together. The first thing we noticed when we walked in was a binder sitting on the kitchen counter. It was labeled in handwriting, "Welcome to the cabin." Pretty normal. We all kind of laughed because we'd seen those before. House rules, Wi-Fi password, trash instructions, that kind of thing. My girlfriend flipped it open first, and right away it looked more detailed than usual. There were pages for everything: appliance instructions, emergency numbers, local hiking spots, even a section explaining how to use the generator if the power went out. It felt overly organized, but not weird, just thorough. So we left it there and didn't think about it again that night. We spent the first evening cooking, drinking, and just sitting on the porch watching the lake get dark. Normal trip stuff. Nothing felt off. At least not at first. The next morning is where I first noticed something strange. My girlfriend was already up before me and sitting at the table. She looked at me and asked, kind of casually, "Did you add anything to the binder last night?" I said no immediately. Then she showed me. Inside the binder, between 2 printed pages, there was a handwritten line that hadn't been there the night before. It said, "Guests arrived at 6:41 p.m. 2 vehicles. Group appears relaxed." We all just stared at it, because nobody had written anything like that. And it wasn't part of the printed guide. It looked like someone had added it directly into the binder overnight. My first thought was that the host had come by, maybe checked in on us. But the cabin was completely isolated. No driveway activity, no sound of anyone coming or going. We checked the rest of the binder carefully. Nothing else seemed different, so we tried to ignore it, but it stuck in the back of my mind the entire day. That night, things escalated slightly. We came back late from a drive into town, probably around midnight. The cabin was dark, except for the porch light, and the binder was open. Not where we left it. Open to a different page. My girlfriend noticed it first, and she didn't touch it right away. She just stood there looking at it. Then I walked over and saw another handwritten note. This one said, "Kitchen activity increases after 11:32 p.m. 1 guest avoids center area." That was accurate. Uncomfortably accurate. Because earlier that night, I had been the only one sitting away from the kitchen table while the others were talking. We hadn't discussed it. It just happened. My girlfriend immediately said it was probably a prank. Maybe the host had cameras and was messing with guests, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore, because the tone didn't feel playful. It felt observational, like someone documenting behavior. We started flipping through more pages carefully. That's when we realized something worse. Some of the earlier printed pages had small handwritten additions in the margins. At first they looked random, but once you started reading them together, they formed a pattern. Notes about movement, notes about timing, notes about where people preferred to sit without ever being asked. And then we found something that made everything feel worse. A fresh page, still warm-looking ink. It said, "Current reader is aware of observation." Nobody spoke for a few seconds, because that line didn't describe the past. It described right now. And at that exact moment, none of us felt like we were just staying in a cabin anymore. We felt like we were inside something that was paying attention. Nobody touched the binder after that. It just stayed open on the table like none of us were willing to be the one to close it. My girlfriend said we should message the host immediately, so we did. We sent a calm message asking if the handwritten notes were part of some kind of setup, something interactive, something explainable. We all waited for a response, but the longer we waited, the more the cabin started feeling wrong in a way I can't really describe cleanly. Not haunted, not dramatic, just like the space had become aware of us being aware of it. Around that time, my friend checked upstairs. Then the other followed. I stayed in the kitchen. I remember watching the binder without meaning to, like I expected it to change again, and it did. Another page was visible now. We hadn't turned anything. We hadn't moved it. It just shifted. This new note said, "Group separation beginning. One guest unaccounted for in living area." I immediately called out to the others. No answer. That silence felt too clean, like it had been prepared. I went into the hallway, listened. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, not rushed, not heavy, just movement, like someone walking because they expected to be there. My girlfriend came back down first. She said she didn't see anything upstairs, and the other friend came in through the side door like he had been outside. Neither of them mentioned hearing anything, but the timing didn't line up. We were all in different parts of the cabin at the same time, and the binder was still open. When I looked back at it, there was another line added. It said, "Awareness increases instability in group behavior." That was the moment we stopped trying to rationalize it. Not because it was scary, because it was consistent. It wasn't random. It was tracking. We packed quickly after that. Nobody argued about leaving. Nobody suggested waiting until morning. We just agreed. The weirdest part was that the binder stayed on the table the entire time, open, like it was watching the process. And every few minutes, I swear the page layout would shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it, as if new lines were being added between glances. We left the cabin just before 3 a.m. No final look back, no stopping. But as we drove away, I noticed something I still can't fully explain. The porch light was on, and the cabin window facing the lake looked like someone was standing inside it. Not moving, just there. And even now, I still don't know if we were ever really supposed to leave without it noticing. We didn't talk much on the drive back, not because anything dramatic happened after we left. Nothing chased us, no sudden lights, no engine failures. It was just that nobody really knew what to say without sounding ridiculous. The silence in the car felt heavier than it should have, though, like we were all replaying the same thing in slightly different ways. The binder, the notes. That last feeling that we weren't just staying in a place, we were being observed inside it. About 20 minutes into the drive, my girlfriend finally spoke. She said, it was probably some kind of host gimmick, like an experiment. No one really responded, because even saying it out loud didn't make it feel better. It just made it sound smaller than what it felt like in the moment. My friend in the back seat then said something I still think about. He said, if it was a joke, why did it feel like it was reacting to us noticing it? And nobody answered that either, because that was the problem. It wasn't just that the notes existed, it was that they seemed to adjust. Like the moment we became aware of them, the cabin became aware of us being aware. We stayed in a motel that night, halfway back. No one wanted to go straight home. Even that felt like carrying something into a place it didn't belong. At the motel, we tried to go over it logically. We pulled up the Airbnb listing again, checked reviews, looked for anything mentioning cameras, hosts staying nearby, or interactive features. Nothing. Normal reviews, nothing even slightly similar to what we experienced. That should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because if there had been other reviews saying something weird, we could have explained it as a known thing. Instead, it felt like we were the only ones who had ever seen it behave that way. The next morning, my girlfriend checked the host messages again. There was a reply, short, almost too short. It said, "We don't leave notes in the binder." That was it. No follow-up, no clarification, just that sentence. We all read it separately. Nobody spoke afterward for a while, because that answer didn't really resolve anything. It just removed the only explanation we were willing to hold on to. When I got home later that day, I tried to forget about it. And for a while, I mostly did. Life has a way of pushing things like that into the background if nothing else reinforces them. But about 2 weeks later, my girlfriend texted me. She sent a photo. It was a screenshot from her phone. She had zoomed in on one of the pictures we took inside the cabin, just a normal group photo from the first night. We were all sitting at the kitchen table. Nothing unusual, except she pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. The binder was visible in the corner of the frame. Open, and I remember that moment clearly now because I had been the one who took that photo. I don't remember the binder being open when I took it. I remember it being closed. But in the image, it wasn't. And on the visible page inside it, there was a faint line of writing that none of us remembered seeing that night. It said, "Documentation continues after departure." I didn't respond to her message right away. I just stared at the photo for a while, because the worst part wasn't the idea that something was tracking us in the cabin. It was the implication that whatever it was didn't stop when we left. And even now, I can't tell if that message was always there in the photo, or if we only noticed it after we started looking for it.